Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Hopefully, you have been enjoying all the content covering the NBA draft, even a video about our NBA 2K23 ratings that we've had on the channel. I've had a lot of fun recording the content for you guys, so I hope you've been having as much enjoyment watching it. This video is going to be focused on NBA free agency. We do have an NBA free agency video already up on the channel where we talked about the top 15 free agents in general, and that was regardless of status, whether they were restricted, unrestricted, had player options or not. This video covers all 198 free agents in 2022, so you can expect maybe a little bit of a longer, more in-depth video here on NBA free agency. I'm really excited to record this video. If you guys do enjoy all the hard work that goes into these videos, make sure to leave a like on today's video. It lets me know I did a good job. And also subscribe to the channel if you are new, or if you've been watching some of our videos, haven't subscribed quite yet. I would really appreciate if you just take that 1 second and actually hit that subscribe button for me right now. Turn on notifications as well if you haven't. Video preview here. We're covering all types of free agents. We're going to go through the guys with club options. We're going to go through the guys with player options. We're going to talk about the players that are unrestricted. And I'm giving my own tiered rankings as well, in addition with the restricted free agents, talking about how I see these players, top dogs, the guys who are going to maybe look at the mid-level exception as potential offers for them. And then also the players who I think maybe sign for the veterans minimum or maybe a little bit above that. And of course, the guys who I don't think should sign. And there's actually more than you would expect. So no shots at those guys, but ultimately I think there's some players out there that teams just should not have any interest in anymore at this point of their careers. And we'll also talk about some potential suitors. I don't have suitors for every player, but I think there's going to be some key players I want to talk about landing spots for. So let's go ahead and jump into this video now. And here are the team options. Here's the guys who are obvious yeses. These teams will keep them around. Lou Dort, I think, is the headliner here. He's the best player on a cheap team option deal. His contract's one of the best in the entire league. He averaged about 17 points a game this past year. Now his efficiency is rather low, but we know what Lou Dort's capable of defensively on a good team. Right now, Oklahoma City doesn't really fit that criteria of being a good team, of course, with their rebuilding strategy. But Lou Dort's been a bright spot for that team. Isaiah Roby has as well, so I think they are obviously going to keep both of those guys. Zubac's another nice contract in the league. Clippers would love to hold on to him. Detroit's got a trio of players I could see them keeping. O'Shea Brissett's one of the lesser known players in the entire NBA, but someone who I think could definitely be a valuable pickup for a team if they were to go get him in free agency. Indiana's not going to let that happen, though. They hold on to him here. Minnesota's got a duo in Reed and Jalen Noel, who I really like. And then you can see the others pictured on the screen. Jayshawn Tate, solid player. Dean Wade, I think, underrated in his own right. And then you see Boston and the Lakers keeping some of their own guys as well. And then we have some other team options who are a little less obvious. And yes, we're covering 198 free agents, so I'm trying to go fast through this. It's going to be a different paced video in comparison to some of the other ones on the channel. Wenyen Gabriel, I think the Lakers probably would keep, just given the fact that he's not 35 years old like most of their roster. So that's already a bonus. Juwan Morgan, Boston would be just fine letting him go. I don't think that there's any long-term implications with him being there, but team options tend to usually get accepted. I think Boston would keep him around. Trey Lyles is probably the closest guy I'm on to saying no. Sacramento might look to move on from him, but they don't really gain any actual cap flexibility by doing so. So keeping him, maybe use him in trades to increase their money going out in some potential deals. Frank Jackson, another guy who I was really close to saying no on. He's about $5 million, but I know Pistons fans do like Frank Jackson, so I guess they see him staying around. And Mike Muscala, 31 years old almost. For Oklahoma City, this is about chemistry if they keep him there. And the fact that they're not going to compete quite yet. Muscala, decent player, not really moving the needle for me, but I could see Oklahoma City really wanting to keep him around. Moving on now to the top dogs here with the player options. John Wall, obviously someone who has a great amount of pedigree, someone who was the first overall pick, had a phenomenal tenure in Washington. But since the injuries, we haven't really got to see him much. It's funny, since 2017, Dirk Nowitzki's actually played more games than John Wall, and Nowitzki retired 3 years ago. So pretty incredible that that statistic is accurate. But I think John Wall will clearly opt in. Too much money on the table for him to opt out. James Harden, I'm unclear on what's going to go down there. There's been reports that he's going to look to sign a short-term deal with Philly. but that's a lot of money for him to turn down in that player option. I think right now I'm leaning towards him not taking it in order to get maybe a 2-year $60 million deal instead of his 1-year $40 that he basically has on his player option. Russ will definitely opt in. There's no way he doesn't. Bradley Beal, that's unclear as well. When you look at Beal in a recent interview, he said that he wants to win regardless of where that is, which definitely puts some pressure on Tommy Shepard, the executive there, that really calls the shots for the Wizards. For Beal, I think he can win in Washington to at least the extent that he wants to. If I had to guess, he stays, but it's definitely more uncertain than it was, say, a month ago. Kyrie Irving, Brooklyn, I'm not even going to guess. Okay, it's Kyrie Irving. All signs point to yes, he should opt in, or yes, he should stay in Brooklyn, but it's Kyrie Irving. You never really know. If James Harden were to leave, don't really know any good landing spots. Bradley Beal could go anywhere he wants via sign and trade. Any team would be willing to move stuff to get him. And Kyrie Irving, I mean, maybe Dallas in a sign and trade, which I don't like that myself. If I had to guess, Kyrie's going to stay in Brooklyn, but again, it's Kyrie Irving. I've got no actual clue on what that guy is ever going to do at any given moment. So let's go into the player options here for role players. JaMychal Green, he'll clearly opt in. That's why Denver traded him. They did not want to pay into the luxury tax for him. PJ Tucker, unclear. I could see it going both ways here, where if he opts in and runs it back with Miami, he's still on that nice, decent $10 million a year or so contract. That's pretty decent value for him. But if he opts out, pretty much every single team in the league would love to add PJ Tucker, at least the top contending teams. He would have at least 10 teams calling his agent the moment he opted out. I guarantee that. Miami would still like to keep him even if he opts out. So maybe he could sign back in on a 3-year, $30 million deal with the player option on the back end of that and probably extend his window. But if he opts in, I don't think it's going to hurt his market next year either, just given his track record and performance in the past. Patty Mills will opt in. I'm certain of that. Connaughton as well, I think, will opt in. He did have a pretty nice playoffs, though, so if he did opt out, maybe he could get closer to that mid-level exception rather than the $5.5 million he's on this next year, which would be interesting. But ultimately, just based on the market, I think he opts in. There's not a lot of money out there in the marketplace this offseason. Kendrick Nunn did not play at all. He will opt into that $5.2 million he's owed. Jeff Green, he's going to opt in with Denver. Bobby Portis and Nick Batum are the two interesting players because they are better players than their contracts show. Both of them took pay cuts to be where they are. Batum with the Clippers, it was easy for him because of how much money Charlotte was paying him to not play for them. But Bobby Portis, he hasn't really had a big payday yet in his career. I think both of them opt in with a wink agreement with management saying, okay, we're going to opt in. We're going to stay cheap for you this year, but you better reward us with a pretty nice extension. For Batum, I could see that being a 2-year, $14 million extension, maybe a 1-year, $8 million type extension. Or Bobby Portis, I could see that being a 3-year, $21 million extension, upwards to maybe 3 years, $30 million. So anywhere from that 7 to 10 range for both of those guys, I think makes some sense. Corey Joseph will opt in for sure. Trey Burke, Tony Bradley, Svi Mykhailiuk, and Thanasis Antetokounmpo clearly all opt in as well. I don't think there's any disagreement to that. And going into unrestricted free agency, the top dogs here, Zach LaVine in Chicago. Where does he go? He's going to get a max contract regardless. I would watch out for the Sacramento Kings. We haven't talked about them enough on the channel this offseason, even though they've been in basically every video. Sacramento's at the heart of everything right now because of having the 4th overall pick. LaVine's the team, or LaVine actually signed with Sacramento. The offer sheet when he was a restricted free agent 4 years ago, Chicago matched. Now, does LaVine actually find his way to Sacramento? Does he look at other options like Dallas, maybe the New York Knicks, or does he stay in Chicago? My guess is he stays with the Bulls. Jalen Brunson, Dallas Mavericks guard, had a great postseason. I could see him getting anything from 4 years, $100 million with a different team, or 5 years, $110 million with the Dallas Mavericks at about $22 million a year. Definitely a spendy price tag for the guard, but I think he is well worth that type of money as long as it's not a max from the Dallas Mavericks and we're looking at $27 million a year. I don't think the Mavericks can really withhold that, but that 5 years, 110 is doable. I keep going back and forth every day. I see him being a Knick. I see him being a Maverick. Knick, Maverick, Knick, Maverick. I can't really decide. Let me know in the comment section where you think Jalen Brunson lands. And Mitchell Robinson, talking about the New York Knicks, I think he's going to look for Robert Williams money, right around that 3 years, $42 million approximately. Maybe he wants to get that out to 4 years, and maybe he'll take a little bit of a pay shave on that. 4 years, 50. I could potentially see. Mitchell Robinson, definitely an intriguing big out in free agency this offseason. If Brunson goes to New York, maybe Mitchell Robinson could come back to Dallas in a sign and trade. I think that would be a pretty good outcome for both teams. Honestly, Mitchell Robinson next to Christian Wood would be an intriguing front court pairing to work with Luka Doncic. Then unrestricted free agents, and we're going to start at the point guard position and work our way up to center. And this is about the $10.26 million annually. And these are the three players I could see getting it this offseason. Tyus Jones, clearly the best backup point guard available this offseason. He could have a nice impact on any team that signs him. Ricky Rubio was playing great in Cleveland before his injury. He might not get the full 10.26, but I think he could get a partial of around $7 million, or maybe for a team in the luxury at about 6.2. I could see Ricky Rubio slotting into that fairly nicely. And then Gary Payton II, not a traditional point guard, guards all over the place. He's a very nice connecting offensive piece. That's really where he's grown in his time bouncing around teams in the G League. Gary Payton II, his corner three-pointer has been huge for his playability in the postseason. And I think he is definitely in line for getting at least a portion of a mid-level exception, if not the entire thing. And if I was a team looking for defense and athleticism and quickness, I would give Gary Payton a 3-year, $30 million deal in a heartbeat. Then we move into unrestricted free agents at the point guard position who will not sign for the mid-level exception, probably closer to the minimum. But there's some good players out here. Players I want to highlight in this group: Elfrid Payton from Phoenix. He had a very nice season the year before in New York, obviously kind of unraveled in the postseason a bit and had less play time this past year with the Suns, just given how good and deep that roster is. I think Payton could still be a valuable player to add, specifically defensively. I would love for a team needing to build a defensive identity, say Charlotte. I think Dallas could still use another defensive player. I think that, if Boston's looking to maybe add another guard into the fold, there's options out there. And I think Elfrid Payton's a very nice addition. DeLon Wright kind of falls into the same group there. He's a little bit quicker than Payton, not as strong. Athletically gets to the rim a little bit better than Elfrid Payton does. The two of them are similar but different, and both could be good options for teams. Javon Carter as well. He's bounced around a bunch. Everyone knows he's a pretty solid defensive point guard. I think offensively, though, he's more limited than, say, a DeLon Wright or even an Elfrid Payton, which is why he's going to be on the minimum next year. Isaiah Thomas, just shout out to him real quick, coming back from that hip. I hope he gets another chance next season. I love watching Isaiah Thomas play basketball. Goran Dragic definitely should stick around. And Rajon Rondo, obviously in the news for some bad things. I just want to say he was one of my favorite point guards growing up. I loved watching this guy play. He's very cerebral. I think he's a very smart person who can make, all the right reads on the basketball floor. I hope he gets another chance, just because I do enjoy watching him play. Some of the passes he's still capable of throwing, like the one-handed scoop pass he threw this year in Cleveland. That was phenomenal. And I hope that he does stick around in the league for at least one more season. So now the point guards that I think should not sign. Avery Bradley, I think his time in the league's just up. Ryan Arcidiacono, championship pedigree at the collegiate level, never really translated to the NBA though. And DJ Augustine, I was shocked that he signed a contract this past year. I don't think that he should be on a roster going into 2023, and I would be rather surprised if he is. Unrestricted free agents for the mid-level shooting guard spot. We look at Jeremy Lamb, kind of the king of the mid-level exception at the shooting guard position. Seems like he's always right around that $10 million a year mark. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets that again this offseason. Maybe a partial, though, maybe like $6 million again for him, but probably more than the minimum. Gary Harris, going to be on the mid-level exception as well for a team. I think there's some potential suitors out there that could make sense. But right now, Gary Harris, if he continues to shoot the three ball well, that's really been the MO for him. He could be a nice value pickup. Malik Monk had a career year with the Lakers. We'll see if he cashes in or stays in LA. I think either are good opportunities for him. And Bruce Brown, a nice connector piece. He will be back in Brooklyn this next year. I know I have him listed as a shooting guard, kind of plays like a center. There's no real position for Bruce Brown. He's just a basketball player. But ultimately for me, I think he gets a mid-level exception with the Brooklyn Nets, maybe anywhere from $7 to $10 million. I would be shocked if it exceeds the $10.26 million a year though. So extra shooting guards. Who else can we look at here? Lou Williams, definitely a bench shot creator. He's taken a step back the last couple seasons since getting traded to Atlanta. Not someone who's going to absolutely light the world on fire anymore like he used to be capable of in LA and some of his other previous stops, but still someone who I think teams should look into signing. Victor Oladipo, another player who can give you some two-way potential. I think offensively he's really lost a lot, though, with some of those quad injuries specifically. His bounce isn't quite there. Wesley Matthews, I would love for any team looking to compete to bring him in. He's a competitive perimeter defender who can shoot the three ball when open. It's funny, he's actually gotten worse at shooting the three as he's aged. Usually you see it the opposite way. Guys tend to get a little bit better, a little bit more skillful when it comes to knocking down open three-point shots. Wes Matthews was phenomenal at it in Portland a long time ago and has actually regressed a bit, but I still think that he could be a decent value player as a pickup. Bryn Forbes, one of the more underrated players in the league. I think he'll probably stay in Denver, on something like a 3-year, $10 million deal, something similar to what we saw Trey Burke sign a few years ago with the Dallas Mavericks. And then Tony Snell, the king of the 50-50-90 club, I guess, but again, very low volume. He could be a nice pickup. He's also the king of the 28 minutes, no stats line. So Tony Snell, we'll see where he goes. New Orleans, if they keep him, I think that's a pretty good outcome for them as well. And Jared Culver, I do want to talk about real quick too. His pedigree being a former top 10 pick keeps him in the league for at least one more season. I was really close to saying he doesn't sign anywhere, but I think just, his name, the recognition from where he was drafted, another team's going to give him a shot. So now here's the shooting guards that should not sign. Ken Bazemore, I think his time's up in the league. He's been a really good player for a long time. And by what I mean with that is a really good role player. But I think now at this point, he's kind of aging out, unfortunately. So sad to see Ken Bazemore go. Theo Pinson should not sign anywhere, but the Dallas Mavericks will retain him, especially after trading Boban Marjanovic, which I know doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is for that locker room, the chemistry there. They're going to keep Theo Pinson around, but I don't think he should, but I think he will sign. And Rodney McGruder, if he gets the minimum, he is robbing a team. Rodney McGruder should not be on an NBA roster next season. Unrestricted free agents at the small forward spot for mid-level exception, Kyle Anderson. He's the king here again, just like Tyus Jones. Memphis has two of the top mid-level exception type free agents this offseason. Both Kyle Anderson and Tyus Jones are going to be great additions to wherever they go. If Memphis can even keep one of those two, it's a big win for them this offseason. TJ Warren, he's the biggest question mark this offseason as well. You look at a forward who exploded in the bubble. When he was in the bubble, played phenomenal basketball we've never seen from him. Now, do I think he'll ever play that way again? No, and he's had some serious injuries. He's missed a ton of time, but on a 1-year, $10 million deal, is that worth a risk for a team? There's really no risk there. 1 year, $10 million becomes an expiring contract. If you think it didn't work out, fine, you're off of him. I think there's some teams that should look into this, maybe Oklahoma City. This is an example where Oklahoma City could get a lot better with some of their young talent and actually improve this team without having to mortgage any of their future assets. I would love for Oklahoma City to look into TJ Warren. I think Indiana keeping him wouldn't be a bad outcome either, though. Joe Ingles, former Jasmine, and you look at him and I don't think he's going to get the full mid-level, but I think, $5 million, $6 million, about right for him. He's better than the minimum. And despite coming off of an injury, any team that could add him would definitely be better. He's able to take a little bit of playmaking responsibility. He's also someone who I think you can rely on in certain situations to just help you, manage the second unit, and he's going to knock down open shots. There's value to that. And I think a bunch of teams are going to show interest. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if he returns back to Utah. And then Otto Porter, he's really played himself back into that mid-level exception territory after taking a cheaper contract this year with Golden State. Phenomenal player who, really fits what Golden State wants to do. I think best case, he stays in Golden State on a, say, 1 year, $9 million deal. Then we go into the extra small forwards. Daniil House is the headliner here. He's a player who's going to be a massive steal with the price tag that he's going to get signed to. Some team will sign him to a minimum, and he will play like a mid-level exception player. Now, he's not as consistent as mid-level exception players, but when he's playing well, he's definitely in that territory. And I think he was a great signing this past year for Utah when they picked him up in the season. And I think regardless of which team he goes to, he will be a competitive defender. He'll knock down some open shots, can handle the ball to a certain extent. Daniil House, definitely the headliner here. The rest of these guys I'm not in love with, but I don't see any small forwards going unsigned because every single team in the league wants a collection of 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" players, and these guys tend to be the most valued when it comes to actual free agency. So moving into the power forward spot now, and there's some really good mid-level exception options here as well. You look at Chris Boucher from Toronto. He's the headliner here. Very intriguing defender because he can block shots out on the three-point line, offers excellent length, and he's a smart defensive player, former G League MVP for the Raptor 905 team. I think he gets a mid-level exception here. I could see him even signing a 4-year mid-level exception, which is really rare to see. You never really see the 4-year, $41 million type of deal. Boucher, I think, would be a decent signing at that, but more than likely I see him signing a 3-year, $31 million contract with the team, and both sides are really happy. Montrezl Harrell is in a little bit of legal trouble right now. That might really impact his free agency status and how many teams show interest in him, but he is still, based on talent, worth that mid-level exception. Thaddeus Young, he will stay in Toronto. There's a lot of reports right now that they want to get a deal done with him. And the fact that they traded a first-round pick makes me believe that they wanted to keep Thad Young there long-term the moment that they traded for him as well. He fits pretty well into that system and everything that Nick Nurse wants to do, so I'd be surprised if they let him go. And then Jalen Smith's one of the more intriguing players in all of free agency this offseason because Phoenix had declined his team options and then traded him to Indiana. So now he enters as an unrestricted free agent around the age of 22, 23 years old. Very rare we see someone who was a top 10 pick enter free agency by the age of 22 or 23. It just doesn't happen. So the fact that he's out here now, I think Indiana would like to keep him. He showed some really nice signs playing next to Halliburton toward the end of the season, but I could see other teams trying to be aggressive getting in there. You could look at some teams like, say, Orlando, or maybe a few other teams like Houston trying to get competitive. Oklahoma City, I think, would be a team looking to take a shot on him at the mid-level exception. And then they kind of force Indiana's hand there on what they want to do if they want to keep Jalen Smith long-term, and is $10 million in overpay for a player who Phoenix did not think was worth keeping. Moving into the extra power forwards, and this is where we get to free agency. And if this was 2015, what a free agent class, right? But unfortunately, it's not. We're in the year 2022, and these names are a little less exciting. Looking at Blake Griffin, Carmelo Anthony, LaMarcus Aldridge specifically, I think that most of those players stay put. I think Carmelo stays in Los Angeles. I think Blake Griffin stays in Brooklyn. And I think LaMarcus Aldridge, if he does not retire, stays in Brooklyn as well. Bielitsa probably stays in Golden State. And then Gary Clark, kind of a wild card. He could go wherever. I don't think it's going to move the needle too much. And I would like Markieff Morris to actually go to the Clippers to play with his brother Marcus, just because I would love it to be a terrible nightmare for broadcast analysts saying Markieff Morris passes to Marcus Morris, but it happens to be the other way around because it's impossible to tell the two apart because they're identical twins. And honestly, they could have switched teams 10 times by now, and I don't think anyone would really know, except for the fact that Marcus Morris is just a better player than Markieff. Then power forwards that should not sign, Udonis Haslem going on 5 years straight of this category, basically. He will re-sign, though, with the Miami Heat. And Paul Millsap, I had the luxury, or maybe the anti-luxury of watching him in person this year. I came away from that game very unimpressed. I do not think he should be on a roster next season, and it's painful to say that. Former All-Star, played really great with Atlanta back in the day, played really well with the Utah Jazz back in the day. He is not an NBA caliber player anymore. His athleticism has faded, and he's just not the same player he was 4, 5, 6 years ago. It's a bummer to say that. Sorry, Paul, for catching the stray here, but I do not think he should be on a roster to start the year next season. Then center, mid-level exception. There's 5 guys here who I think could get the full or partial. Mainly the partial here because the center position, it's way different in terms of how teams approach this. And a lot of centers that sign mid-level exceptions end up getting traded because teams are like, ooh, we should not have given up that much money for a center. Yusuf Nurkic is definitely worth the full mid-level exception. I do not think he's worth more than that, though. I would be very hesitant giving him $15 million a year. And it's not because he's a bad player. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the league. But when you're looking at a center who doesn't protect the rim, doesn't really switch out in space as well, you're already limited. So that $10.26 million, that would be my ceiling for what I would give Nurkic myself. But I could see a team giving him 13, 14. It just would not be me. JaVale McGee, another player who I think is worth probably not the full mid-level, but close to it. I think $7 million a year, if you sign him on a 3-year 21, you're pretty happy about it because he's athletic, can screen and roll better than most bigs in the league. And yes, he's had a lot of Shaq'd in a full moments in his career, but realistically, when stuff's going right, he plays very well. And I think he's one of the more underrated players in the entire league simply because of some of his bad plays that make him look really terrible. But for the most part, he's a very valuable player. Isaiah Hartenstein, look at it like a 3-year, $15 million deal. So he's going to get a partial mid-level exception. Definitely think that's worth signing as well. Andre Drummond, I would give a 1-year full mid-level exception to. And I know that's going to sound pretty crazy because most teams are going to look at giving him the minimum. The reason why I have him listed here and why I would be comfortable giving him a 1-year, $10 million deal, as long as I'm not up against the luxury tax, is because, first of all, if you're already over the salary cap, you get to use the mid-level exception this one time for one player. And if you bring him in and he works out, it's valuable. And you're not going to find a guy who's capable of rebounding 13, 14 points a game at $10 million. Not 13, 14 points, or 13, 14 rebounds a game at $10 million. You're just not going to find that, clearly. So getting Andre Drummond is going to help a ton of teams. And yes, if you get to the playoffs and you don't want to play Drummond, just take him out of the lineup. Okay, that mid-level exception, just because you give someone a mid-level exception doesn't mean they have to be a steady part of your playoff rotation. I know that you'd like them to be, but look at the other options out here. Isaiah Hartenstein was not going to become a consistent piece of the Clippers rotation. JaVale McGee kind of got played out of the playoffs a little bit too for Phoenix. Yusuf Nurkic, I mean, what's his playoff track record look like? You're not going to get someone who's going to be a great center in the postseason on the mid-level exception. That's fine. Just take him out of the game. Play small. Do whatever you have to do. But Andre Drummond's rebounding is heavily valuable for the regular season. Thomas Bryant, he's still young, which is surprising because it feels like he came into the league like 12 years ago, but it's been more like 6. And he's, at this point of his career, someone who I still think could give you valuable minutes. I would give him probably 2 years, $12 million. And if you're a team looking for a center, I mean, you look at teams like the Dallas Mavericks. I think the Boston Celtics could use another backup big. Brooklyn would like to keep one of these guys if it's not Drummond. There's teams out here that need centers, and center is one of the most volatile positions. When you look at the guys here next to our extras, you're going to realize why those mid-level exception guys are so valuable. Robin Lopez, probably the best option out here. Hassan Whiteside, okay, yeah, that's when we're getting shakier. Bismack Biyombo, if he's not playing with Chris Paul, I'm not buying it. DeMarcus Cousins, I would buy on the veteran minimum. Please sign me up for DeMarcus Cousins. I think, again, he said it best when he was on a 10-day contract and said he's got to be the only player in NBA history to be on a 10-day contract and double teamed. I've never seen that before. He's completely right. He is worthy of being on an NBA roster on day one of the season next year. The fact that he probably won't be is a shame. Ed Davis, Dwayne Dedmon, Tristan Thompson, Dwight Howard. I mean, you see what I'm saying about Drummond now? Drummond's not great, but he's better than all these options. That's really the reality of the situation. And then centers that should not get signed. Gorgui Dieng from Atlanta. Please, nobody sign Gorgui Dieng. Damian Jones. Luke Cornett is not an NBA level player, sorry. Greg Monroe was really good back in Detroit in like 2014, but it's 2022. He's kind of the exemplary center of the league changing. He would have been awesome back in the 1990s, but the league changed dramatically. His play style kind of faded and his athleticism left as well. Greg Monroe, not an NBA level player anymore. DeAndre Jordan, I think the epitome of not an NBA caliber player anymore. The fact that he threw the ball out of bounds with the Lakers by about 20 feet and then got released the next day should have been the end of his career. That should have been. But Philly was so desperate after trading Andre Drummond that they said, yeah, we're going to sign DeAndre Jordan and actually play him. We know all how that ended up working out. So now let's get to restricted free agency. And this is really the fun part here. This is the part of the video where I think a lot of people are going to be excited for the potential players out there who could help teams win. DeAndre Ayton, he's the headliner, former #1 overall pick. Will Phoenix keep him? Will they not? Will he get a max? I hope not. That would be a massive overpay if someone gives DeAndre Ayton a max. I think at most he's worth about $18 million a year. I would have real issues going above that number just with how much difficulty and how strenuous the rest of my roster would have to be in terms of financial to stay out of the luxury tax. Ayton would put a lot of pressure there, but I think teams like Detroit maybe would be willing to give him the max, or at least north of $20 million. I think Charlotte will look into DeAndre Ayton pretty heavily. I think that, there's going to be teams out there that want Ayton. I think OKC would be better signing him. Will Phoenix let him go? They could match an offer sheet. We'll see. Miles Bridges from Charlotte. He's going to stay in Charlotte. he's going to get a lot of money. 4 years, $100 million, maybe 4 years, 94, something in that realm. I see Bridges staying with the Hornets though. Colin Sexton, we have a video up on the channel about him. I'm not going to talk too much about him here. I'll try to put a card to that here. If not, just go on the channel and scroll through and you'll find the Sexton video. It came out in the last week. Marvin Bagley from Detroit, he's going to stay with the Pistons. There's no question about that. Troy Weaver wants him around. And I think that was a nice low buy move for that Pistons team. Mo Bamba from Orlando, I have no idea where he's going. I'm going to be completely honest. He is the most wild card player this free agency for me, because he could go anywhere. Any team could have interest in him. He's got a dynamic game just with how big he is, his ability to shoot the three ball to a certain extent. And he's gotten better at rebounding the basketball as well, which was huge for his development. Now it just comes down to which team actually wants to add him. I don't really have a good read. Does Orlando plan on taking Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren? And does that impact Bamba's future there? Maybe. Anthony Simons from Portland, he will stay with the Blazers, probably on something like a 4-year, $72 million deal, about $18 million a year. It's more than I'd be willing to pay for Anthony Simons, but I understand why Portland would do it. And ultimately, they'll keep him around. I think it's not bad. 4-year 72, it could be worse, but I think, you know, ultimately for me, I'd try and sign him to like 4 years 60. $15 million a year is a little bit better in my eyes for Simons rather than that $18 million mark annually. It's quite a bit of a difference, but Simons, he's going to get paid either way. So solid pickups that are restricted free agents. Nick Claxton, if a team misses out on Ayton, they should go all in on getting Claxton. You're looking at probably a 3-year, $30 million deal to get the job done. Maybe 3 years, 33 to put a little bit extra pressure onto Brooklyn. And Claxton's one of the more switchable bigs in the league. I don't think people really realize how solid this guy is defensively. The concerns here, he's got stamina and health issues in terms of staying on the floor. And he also does not shoot free throws well at all, as cited by his 10 straight misses in the postseason from the free throw line. That is incredibly bad, but every other part of his game, pretty solid. Lonnie Walker, solid player. I could see him getting a mid-level exception type contract as well, 3 years, 30, somewhere in that realm. Dante DiVincenzo, I would not touch with the 37.5-foot pole, which oddly enough is right around where his field goal percentage is at about 37.5. You know, defensively he's solid. Offensively, you know, I don't know. I'm just not signing Dante DiVincenzo. Sorry about it. Troy Brown Jr., Kevin Knox, Cody Martin, those are 3 wings that maybe have some interest around the league. Amir Coffey, I would love to sign. This kid has improved immensely from where he was with the Minnesota Golden Gophers back in his collegiate days. Went from being a playmaking point guard who would put pressure on the rim at 6'7" to now playing the small forward / shooting guard position and being an elite shooter. Those two things usually don't happen. You typically don't go from being a slashing guard who is a playmaker to being a good spot up and movement shooter at the NBA level. Amir Coffey has made that adjustment. He's gotten so much better in his tenure with both the Agua Caliente Clippers in the G League and the actual Clippers organization at the NBA level. Trent Forrest could be a nice little pickup for a team, but ultimately I think Utah keeps him. Ish Wainwright, I would like for a lot of teams to go sign Ish Wainwright simply because he's a big, strong forward who could give you minutes throughout the regular season right away. Nathan Knight, watch out for this kid. He's going to stay in Minnesota, but he is a freak athlete who can handle the ball a little bit as a big. And I think that the sky could be the limit for this kid. If he gets an opportunity, he could really show out in the coming seasons. Trevelin Queen as well, star player from the G League this past year. The Rockets G League affiliate won the actual G League championship as well. They've won multiple G League championships already in the last decade, and Trevelin Queen was easily the best player there. Eric Paschall doesn't really matter to me. I think he was one of the more overrated players in the NBA for quite some time, and it's not a surprise that Utah barely played him this past season. And that's going to be the video. You're going to notice I did leave out some restricted free agents. That's because I just think that they stay where they're at. I didn't feel like I needed to talk about every single restricted free agent that I think just stays. So if you're looking for a specific RFA who I didn't mention, I think he stays with his original team because more than likely that's what happens with most of those guys. Make sure you guys like and subscribe for today's video if you did really enjoy all the work and content that you watched today. Comment free agency frenzy if you are still here at this part of the video. It lets me know you made it all the way to the end and that I did a good job and that you enjoyed this video. Thanks again, guys, so much for watching. Hopefully you've been enjoying all the content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.